"You're not wanted here," the mine foreman said. He had planted himself in the doorway like he'd been told to. "We filled the bookkeeping position last week. Pack up and ride back to Cheyenne." Opal Merritt set her travel case down on the bottom step, looked up at him, and said, "The Ward Creek Mining Trust sent me a letter of offer dated the 14th of September, countersigned by the trust manager. The position was not filled last week. You're standing in a doorway that belongs to the trust, not to you. Move." She was 27 years old and had spent 4 days on roads that rattled the bones loose from their joints to get here. And she had decided somewhere along the eastern Wyoming flats that no foreman with a thick neck and a thin argument was going to be the thing that stopped her. If you have ever earned something and then had to fight just to claim it, this story is for you. Follow Dusta Hart all the way to the end. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and drop a comment telling me what state you're watching from. I want to know how far this story travels. The stagecoach had left Opal at the junction of 2 dirt roads with a hand-painted sign that read Ward Creek. For am I in the particular silence of mountain country that is less about peace and more about distance. She had been traveling since Sunday. 4 days on coaches that smelled of wet wool and axle grease, eating what she could manage from her bag, sleeping upright against the window glass. She had the letter in her coat pocket, and the arithmetic of her situation running constantly in the back of her mind. She had taken the bookkeeping position at Ward Creek Mining Trust not because it was comfortable, but because comfortable situations had a way of becoming dangerous ones. She knew this from experience. 3 years ago, her father's farm outside of Terre Haute, Indiana, had been taken through a forged mortgage transfer, the kind where the paperwork looks ordinary until you know what to look for, and then you cannot understand how you ever missed it. Her father had trusted the documents. He had trusted the bank agent who presented them. He had signed the transfer believing he was refinancing at better terms. And 6 months later, a land company from Chicago owned 240 acres of Indiana soil that had been in the Merritt family since 1848. Opal had been running the farm's accounts for 5 years by then. She had not been in the room when her father signed. She had never stopped thinking about that. She picked up her travel case and walked the 4 miles. The Ward Creek Mining Trust operated out of a cluster of timber buildings, set against the base of a limestone ridge in the foothills south of the Bighorn Range. The property was larger than she had expected. A main office building, a cookhouse, a long bunkhouse, 2 equipment sheds, a stamp mill she could hear from a quarter-mile out, and a series of mine openings cut into the ridge above. There were men working at various points across the property, moving with the focused industry of a working operation. She had nearly reached the main gate when she noticed the man working alone on the frame of what would eventually be a storage building. The foundation posts were in, and he was setting the crossbeam connections one at a time, checking the angle with his eye before moving to the next. He had the deliberate patience of someone who built things to last rather than to impress. His coat was plain and worn at the elbows. His hands, when she got close enough to see them, were calloused across the knuckles in the way of hands that did real work. He looked up. His eyes were gray-green, the color of sage after rain. Not unfriendly, not particularly warm either. The eyes of a man who observed things carefully and then kept what he saw to himself. "You looking for the main office?" he asked. His voice was even and unhurried. "I am," Opal said. He tilted his head toward the center building. "Second door on the left. Selden's usually there before noon." "Thank you." He went back to his crossbeam. She went to the second door on the left, where she met the foreman named Gordon Prout, who told her the position had been filled. She told him to move. He moved. The records room was behind the main office, and the moment Opal stepped into it, she understood 2 things simultaneously: why she had been hired, and why Gordon Prout had not wanted her here. The room was a disaster of a particular kind. Not random neglect, something worse than that. Ledger books from different fiscal years were shelved together with no system. Supply invoices were stuffed into a coffee tin. Pay registers for the current quarter were stacked on the floor because the shelf above them was occupied by repair logs from 1879. The contracts file, actual employment contracts, legal documents, had been used as a surface for someone's lunch at some point, and the stain had soaked through 3 pages. Opal removed her coat, set her bag in the corner, and began. It took her 20 minutes to find the payroll ledger. When she did, She opened it to the current quarter and read, because she had learned at 19 that the place where fraud lives in a ledger is never where you expect it. It is in the patterns, the intervals, the small recurring discrepancies that individually look like rounding errors and collectively look like theft. She found the first one inside of an hour. The wage rates in the current payroll ledger did not match the wage rates in the employment contracts. The contracts were clear, a graduated scale based on role and years of service. The ledger reflected rates that were lower, consistently lower, by amounts ranging from 8 to 50%. The difference in each individual case was small. The accumulated difference over the 6 quarters she could trace so far was not small at all. She was still working when the cookhouse bell rang for supper. She kept working. It was past 9 o'clock when she heard boots in the hallway and looked up. The door was open. The man from the storage building frame stood in it, not leaning, not posing, just standing with the stillness of someone who had stopped walking and would remain stopped until he chose otherwise. He had cleaned up from the day's work, but there was still sawdust on his forearms. "Still at it," he said. "The records are worse than I expected," Opal said. His eyes moved across the open ledger on her desk. She noticed they did not move the way casual eyes moved. They moved like someone reading. "When were these last properly maintained?" she asked. "Before Prout took over the record side," he said. 2 years ago, maybe more." "What changed 2 years ago?" He was quiet for a moment, in a way that was not evasion but calculation, the kind a person performs when deciding how honest a particular moment can hold. "Management arrangement changed," he said. "New trust administrator came in." "That's not a complete answer." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He looked at the ledger once more. "Don't lock the room when you leave." He walked away down the hall. She listened to his boots fade. She locked the room. She did not sleep well. The mineral rights transfer documents were at the bottom of a box she found on the 3rd morning, wedged behind a broken desk drawer and covered by 2 years of equipment maintenance logs. They were folded the wrong way, which was how she almost missed them. She unfolded them and read. The Ward Creek Mining Trust held verified mineral rights to the entire limestone ridge, silver ore, documented and filed with the Wyoming Territorial Land Office in 1878. The trust owned the rights outright. What was also in the box was a transfer instrument dated 11 months ago. It transferred subsurface mineral extraction rights to a company called Continental Basin Holdings for the listed consideration of $1 and no further compensation. Opal read it twice, then a 3rd time, because the first 2 times she had not been willing to believe what she was reading. $1 for verified silver mineral rights on a limestone ridge that a working mine was actively extracting from. She folded the document carefully and placed it inside her coat. Then she went to find the man who had warned her not to work alone too late. She found him at the storage building frame, which had advanced considerably since the previous day. He was fitting the roof joists now, working from a ladder with the same unhurried accuracy he gave everything. "I need to ask you about something," she said. He climbed down from the ladder. "All right." "Continental Basin Holdings," she said. "Do you know that name?" He went very still, not the stillness of a man searching his memory, the stillness of a man who already knew exactly what she had said and was deciding, in real time, what to do with that. "Where did you see it?" he asked. "Mineral rights transfer. 11 months ago. The trust transferred extraction rights on the full ridge to Continental Basin for $1. She watched his face. "Those rights are worth considerably more than $1. "Yes," he said. "They are." "Do you know who authorized that transfer?" He held a timber nail without using it. "I know who signed the instrument," he said. "I don't know who arranged it. Those aren't the same person." Declan. She used his name because she had learned it from the cook 3 days ago, and she had found in her experience that using a person's name directly was the most honest way to ask for the truth. "If you know something about what is happening in those records, you need to tell me. I was hired to manage the accounts for this trust. If someone is stealing from it—" "They are," he said quietly. She waited. "Have been for at least 2 years, the wages, the supply invoices, the transfer you found. It's all part of the same operation." He looked at her steadily. "I've known about it." "For how long?" Something moved in his expression. Not guilt, not grief exactly, but the weight of a man who had been carrying a significant thing for a significant amount of time and had learned to do it without showing what it cost. "Long enough," he said. Gordon Prout's voice cut across the yard before she could ask the next question. "Ward, the East Drift bracing needs checking before the afternoon shift." Declan looked at her. "Later," he said quietly. He picked up his ladder and walked away. She stood in the cold morning air with a stolen mineral rights document inside her coat, and the understanding settling over her that she had walked into something considerably larger than a bookkeeping position. She had felt this before. She knew exactly what it felt like. She was not walking away from it. That evening she found him at the small room he kept at the far end of the bunkhouse, a separate space barely larger than a supply closet, with a single window and a wood stove and a shelf of books that stopped her when she saw it. Engineering texts, mining law, 2 volumes on territorial water rights, a Bible with a broken spine that had been read the way Bibles get broken spines. "Tell me who you actually are," she said. He was at the table with a set of surveying calculations. He set down his pencil. "I told you my name." "Part of it." She held his gaze. "I heard Gordon Prout talking behind the equipment shed this afternoon. He mentioned a timeline for a second transfer, and he mentioned me. That I was getting too close to something. I have the mineral transfer document. I have the wage discrepancies. But I can't do what needs to be done with what I have and no standing. So I'm asking you directly, because a carpenter doesn't know this property the way you know it. A carpenter doesn't have a shelf of mining law in his room. Who are you?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached to the engineering text on the second shelf, and from behind it removed an envelope. He placed it on the table in front of her. She opened it. It was a correspondence from the Wyoming Territorial Land Office in Cheyenne, addressed to Declan Elliott Ward, Ward Creek Mining Trust, Carbon County, Wyoming Territory. She read the name twice, then she looked up at him. He was watching her with those gray-green eyes that she now understood were not the eyes of a man comfortable with ordinary things. They were the eyes of a man who had been waiting, with the patience of someone who builds load-bearing structures for a living. For exactly this moment. "Word," she said, "this is your trust." "Yes." "This is your mine." "It was my father's. I've run it for 6 years." She looked at the room, the wood stove, the narrow cot, the surveying calculations on the table, the boots by the door that had walked every inch of this property in every kind of weather. "You own this entire operation," she said, "and you've been working it like a hired hand." "I've been working it," he said, "the way I know how." The silence between them carried weight. "Why?" she finally said. He looked at the fire in the wood stove. "When I came back from 2 years in Denver dealing with the business side of the trust holdings, I found that the administrator Continental Basin Holdings had placed, a man named Sterling Dam, had restructured the management arrangement in ways that looked legal and weren't. Prout was in place. The payroll was under his control. The workers were being underpaid and afraid to say anything because Prout controlled their employment contracts. I could have walked in as the owner and fired everyone and started over, but I had watched Dam work. He has connections to the Territorial Commissioner's office. If I announced myself before I had the evidence, he would move the documents and disappear, and every man on this property would lose his job and his housing, and I'd be left with a legal dispute that his lawyers could drag out for 3 years. He looked at her. So I arranged for someone with actual accounting skills to be hired into the records position. The air in the small room went very still. "I knew about your family's farm in Indiana," he said. "I knew about the forged mortgage transfer. I knew you had managed your father's accounts for 5 years before it happened, that you understood from experience exactly what a fraudulent conveyance looks like. Not as an abstraction, as something real." She thought about what she wanted to say. The word she was looking for sat somewhere between calculated and unconscionable, and she had not decided yet which one she meant more. "You recruited me," she said, "without telling me what I was being recruited for." "Yes." "You don't get to make that choice for me." "No," he said. "I'm telling you now." She stood up and crossed to the window. Outside, the ridge was dark against a sky packed with stars, the mine openings black against the limestone. Her father's farm had looked nothing like this. The paperwork had looked exactly the same. She turned back. "What do you need from me?" Something in him shifted, the posture of a man who has been holding a weight at arm's length and has just been permitted to set it down. Everything in those records, he said, documented, cross-referenced, irrefutable. How long before Dam arrives? 17 days. He visits the operation quarterly. And the transfer I found, the mineral rights, is the first in a sequence. He spread a survey map on the table. There are 3 more parcels he intends to move before winter. Together, the 4 transfers cover the complete extraction corridor from the East Drift to the primary ore body. Without those mineral rights, the trust owns the land but not what's in it. Opal looked at the map. The shape of what Dam was assembling was immediately clear, parcel by parcel, working north to south, each transfer recorded through the trust's management system as a routine administrative adjustment. He's not stealing a mine, she said. He's building a railway asset. The Northern Continental Railway is extending a spur line through Carbon County. The planned route runs along the base of this ridge. Whoever holds the mineral rights for the full corridor holds something a railway company will pay an extraordinary sum to control. She looked at him. There's one more thing you haven't told me yet. He was quiet for exactly 1 beat too long, which was its own kind of answer. You signed the first transfer, she said. Under the representation that it was a standard quarterly administrative restructuring, he said, and his voice had the flatness of a man stating a fact he has long since stopped flinching from. Dam presented it as routine. I had previously authorized my trust administrator to execute routine administrative actions on my behalf. I didn't realize what I had actually signed until 6 weeks later. By that point, it was recorded. He met her eyes. If we come after him, he claims owner authorization for the entire scheme. He has my signature as his insurance. Opal understood the shape of it immediately. Not authorization, she said, manipulation. The proof is in every subsequent transfer he executed without coming back to you. That's the argument I have to build, he said. Then that's what I build, she said. She pulled on her coat. I'm not doing this for you. I want to be clear about that. I'm doing this because the men on this property are owed wages they earned, and a signature on a document someone didn't understand shouldn't be allowed to take those wages from them. The same way nobody stopped it from happening to my father. He held her gaze. I know, he said quietly, that's why I asked you. She walked back to the records room. The stars were out over the ridge, and the stamp mill was quiet, and she lit the lamp and opened the ledger and went to work. The next morning, a young miner named Nate Collis appeared at the records room door with 2 cups of coffee and the expression of someone who has made a decision and is standing on the far side of it. He was 22 or 23, with a sunburned face and hands already acquiring the roughness of mine work. You're fixing the books, he said. Not quite a question. Documenting them, Opal said. There's a difference. He set one of the cups down. Prout told the men last night that you were sent by Continental Basin to clean the records before an inspection, that you work for Dam. I work for the Ward Creek Mining Trust, Opal said. She turned to face him directly. Nate, has your monthly wage ever been different from what your contract specified? He was quiet long enough to answer the question without speaking. They said the silver price had dropped, he said finally. That the trust had authorized a temporary reduction. We didn't have papers to say different. Opal showed him the page, his contract rate in the original ledger, the reduced rate in the secondary payment register, his own name in ink on both lines. He looked at it for a long time. That's my money, he said. Yes, she said, it is, and I need you to ask the men who kept their original employment papers to bring them to me, whatever they have. He looked at the ledger, then at her, then at some middle distance where he was working something out. Does Ward know? He asked. He said the name without hesitation. Not the carpenter, not the quiet fellow at the frame. Ward, as if he had always known on some level which man on this property the important questions moved around. Yes, Opal said, he knows. Nate nodded slowly, the nod of someone who has had something confirmed rather than surprised by it. All right then, he said. He left. By afternoon, 9 men had come to the records room with their original employment papers. By evening, Opal had 9 sworn statements and a cross-referenced wage fraud document covering 22 months and 11 workers. She was binding the set when Declan appeared in the doorway. Prout sent a telegraph this afternoon, he said. I found the receipt in the waste bin. Damn, Opal said. Most likely. He was due in 17 days. He may arrive considerably sooner. She looked at the document set on the table. Not everything she had planned to build, but perhaps enough. "How far is the Territorial Land Office?" she said. "Sheehan, 2 days hard ride." "Can you have horses ready before first light?" He looked at the documents, then he looked at her. "Before you are," he said. They rode out in darkness, 2 horses at a working pace along the ridge trail descending into the valley and connecting, 3 miles out, to the Territorial Road south. Opal had the document set in a leather case across her saddle. The copy she had made of the most critical wage entries was folded flat against her ribs, inside her coat, because she had grown up listening to her father talk about the one time you should assume the worst is also the one time you cannot afford to be surprised by it. An hour south of Ward Creek she heard it, 2 sets of hoofbeats behind them, deliberate, not the random travel pace of ordinary riders. Declan heard them before she did. He said nothing. He moved his horse to the left side of the road, placing himself between Opal and the sound behind them. That single movement told her everything she needed to know about what he thought was coming. "There's a way station at Cutter's Crossing," he said quietly. 9 miles, stage traffic, public ground. They won't move on us in front of witnesses. And if we don't reach it first, then we go faster than them." He glanced back once. Opal. She had already taken a firmer grip on the reins. "Say when." "Now," he said. They ran. The horses stretched out on the road and the cold air hit her face, and the document case pressed hard against her arm, and she rode the way her father had taught her on the Indiana farm before everything had been taken from them, completely, without reservation, with nothing held back. The 2 riders behind them came up fast for the first mile, and then the way station lights appeared ahead, warm yellow squares in the dark, and they did not lose ground after that. They pulled up at Cutter's Crossing at a working trot rather than a gallop, because arriving at a gallop told onlookers too much. They walked inside with the calm purpose of travelers who knew exactly where they were going. Behind them on the road, the sound of pursuit slowed and did not follow through the door. They rested the horses for 40 minutes, watered them properly at the station trough, and let them eat from the hay bin before they rode south again. The followers came with them at a distance through the long night, and the stars over Wyoming were enormous and indifferent, and Opal rode with the mineral rights document inside her coat, and the copy of the wage entries flat against her ribs, and did not allow herself to think about what happened if this failed, because she had decided a long time ago that was a door she was not willing to open. They reached Cheyenne by mid-afternoon of the following day. The Wyoming Territorial Land Office was on Capitol Avenue, a stone building that communicated permanence to a territory still in the process of earning it. A clerk was locking the front door when they came up the steps. "Office is closed. 4 o'clock. Come back in the morning." Opal looked at him. She was road-dusted and had not slept and was carrying the most significant mineral rights fraud case in Carbon County in a leather satchel under her arm, and she did not have the time or the patience for mourning. "Tell the Territorial Examiner," she said, "that the operating trust documents for Ward Creek Mining are in my possession. Tell him there is documented evidence of mineral rights fraud affecting the full extraction corridor, systematic wage theft against 11 workers, and a transfer scheme tied to the Northern Continental Railway land acquisition plan. Tell him the man who arranged the fraud arrives in this territory in approximately 72 hours. She held the clerk's gaze with everything she had. And tell him that if he reviews these documents tonight, he has the opportunity to stop the most significant mineral rights fraud case this territory has handled in a decade. If he waits until morning, some of the documentation may develop complications." The clerk stared at her. He looked at Declan, who stood slightly behind her, and said nothing, and did not need to say anything. The clerk went back inside. 6 minutes later, the door opened again. "Examiner Hardcastle will see you," he said. Examiner Hardcastle was 60 years old, compact, with the eyes of a man who had spent 3 decades reviewing documents and had become very difficult to impress. He became, in Opal's estimation, somewhat more impressed as the evening progressed. She walked him through the wage fraud first. Original contracts beside secondary payment registers, side by side, and 9 sworn statements. He asked 4 questions, all precise and technical. She answered all 4 without hesitation because she had anticipated all 4 during the ride and organized the supporting materials accordingly. When she reached the mineral rights transfers and laid the annotated survey map beside the 4 transfer documents in sequence, Hardcastle stopped her. "This is a deliberate corridor assembly," he said. "Yes. The 4 transfers, if completed, would give Continental Basin Holdings full subsurface rights along the northern face of the Ward Creek Limestone Ridge. The Northern Continental Railway's surveyed spurline route runs adjacent to that ridge. Current assessed value of those rights to a railway concern, conservatively $40,000 to $60,000. He set the map down and read the worker statements one by one, slowly, the way a man reads something that matters rather than something he is processing. When he finished the last one, he looked at the final document she placed before him, the original mineral rights transfer, with Declan's signature at the bottom. "Mr. Ward," he said, looking past Opal. Declan stepped forward and explained the circumstances of that signature, the misrepresentation of routine administrative action, the standing authorization that Dam had exploited, the 6 weeks before he discovered what he had actually signed. He spoke without apology and without performance, just the facts in the order they had occurred. Hardcastle was quiet for a time. The pattern of subsequent transfers, all executed without the owner's knowledge or secondary authorization, constitutes the evidence that the first signature was obtained through misrepresentation, he said. A genuine administrative restructuring would have required ongoing documentation. The fraud required him to never come back to you. He looked at Opal. "You built this structure." "Yes," she said. He reached for his pen. "I'm issuing an emergency injunction this evening. All Continental Basin Holdings transactions affecting Ward Creek Trust properties are frozen pending investigation. The Territorial Marshal will ride for Carbon County tonight to secure the records room." He looked at Declan. "The Trust's ownership authority is restored as of this moment." He looked at Opal. "You will be required to testify at the full evidentiary hearing. 60 days. "I'll be there," she said. Outside on the steps in the cold November air, Opal held the empty document case and breathed. The injunction was signed. The documents were in the court's possession. The instrument Dam had kept in reserve as his insurance was now in a territorial examiner's filing cabinet. Declan stood beside her, not in front of her, not behind her. Beside her, which she had noticed was consistently how he positioned himself, and which she had stopped pretending did not mean something to her. "You said you weren't doing this for me," he said. "I'm not." "No," he said. "I know, that's what made it possible." She looked out at Capitol Avenue, at the ordinary traffic of a territorial city going about its business with no knowledge of what had just been walked through a government door in a road-worn leather case, by a woman who had learned what fraud looked like from the inside of losing everything to it. "My father would have liked to see this," she said. She had not said that out loud before. She had not expected to say it now. It came out simply, without the compression she had learned to carry it with, and that was something. That was a thing she had not known. She was waiting for permission to do. Declan said nothing. He didn't need to. The evidentiary hearing took place 41 days later in a courtroom in Cheyenne that was full in the particular way of rooms where a significant thing is happening, that people in the surrounding territory have been waiting to see resolved. Sterling Dam's legal counsel was formidable, 2 Eastern lawyers fluent in the vocabulary of procedural challenge. They challenged the sworn statements. They challenged the copied documents. They challenged Opal's personal history with land fraud as a disqualifying bias. The territorial judge overruled the third challenge with a statement that became the most discussed passage of the proceeding. The court finds that the witness's direct experience with the mechanism of fraudulent conveyance constitutes relevant expertise, not disqualifying interest. The court further notes that the documents speak independently of the witness's analysis, and those documents have not been successfully challenged on their merits. When the findings were read, the courtroom went completely quiet for one full moment, the way a room goes quiet when something true has just been stated in official language for the first time. Then Nate Collis, who had taken 2 days off work to ride to Cheyenne and sit in an uncomfortable gallery chair in his best coat, began to clap, and the room joined him, not dramatically, not the way rooms do in stories that value spectacle over truth, but with the genuine sound of people for whom justice had just become something specific and located, rather than something you hoped for and did not expect. Sterling Dam was bound over for criminal trial on 4 counts of fraudulent conveyance and 2 counts of criminal conspiracy. Gordon Prout provided a full statement to the territorial prosecutor in exchange for a reduced charge. Continental Basin Holdings was placed under receivership across all 7 properties where the scheme had been identified, including 6 others in Wyoming and Montana whose trust managers had come forward in the weeks after Hardcastle's injunction went out on the wire. It was not a perfect outcome. Perfect outcomes did not exist outside of stories that valued tidiness over truth. There were men who had worked 2 years at reduced wages that no court order could fully compensate for the time lost. There was a farm in Indiana still in the hands of a Chicago land company, and a father who was still gone, and the particular grief of understanding that the law returned what it could, and the rest of it you carried forward and used. But the men at Ward Creek received their back wages before the spring thaw. That was real. That was something that had not existed before Opal Merritt walked 4 miles up a mountain trail with a travel case and a letter of offer and a refusal she had never once considered putting down. The morning after the verdict, Declan came to the hotel where Opal was staying and sat across from her at the breakfast table without explanation. He had been doing this, sitting across from her, directly, without the careful distance he kept from everyone else, since the week after the injunction was filed, and she had been letting it mean what it meant without rushing to name it. "The trust will need a permanent records and accounts manager," he said. "The court proceedings will require ongoing document support for at least a year." "I'm aware of that," she said. "I'm not asking you to stay because of the proceedings." His voice had shifted to the particular register of a man who has decided to say a true thing and is going to say it with the same quality of attention he gave everything else, complete, unhurried, not a word extra. "I'm asking because for 6 weeks I watched you carry a weight that belonged to this property and the men on it as though it were your own, and you carried it without putting it down. And the only way I know how to say what that means to me is to tell you that whatever Ward Creek is, and whatever I intend it to be, it is not the same place without you in it." Opal looked at him across the breakfast table. "You brought me there without telling me the full picture," she said. "Yes." "You put me in the path of 2 men on a dark road." "Yes." "And you're asking me to stay." "I'm asking whether you want to," he said. "There's a difference." She looked out the hotel window at the Cheyenne morning. Ordinary traffic, an ordinary city with no idea what had happened in that courtroom, or what it would mean for 11 men in Carbon County who would receive back wages before spring. She thought about the Indiana farm and the forged mortgage and her father's last winter, and she thought about what it meant that she was not that person. Sitting in an empty kitchen watching something be taken apart. She had been the one in the records room with the lamp burning. She had been the one on the courthouse steps with the document case and the road dust on her coat. "Ask me properly," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then simply, "Stay." 1 word, no decoration, the word of a man who had spent 6 weeks demonstrating what he meant and needed only 1 word to name it. "I was going to anyway," she said. "I just needed you to ask." The winter at Ward Creek was the first in 3 years that Opal spent somewhere she had chosen to be. The records room was properly organized at last. The wage registers were accurate. The stamp mill ran on fair terms. Nate Collis stopped by most mornings with coffee and had taken it upon himself to learn the filing system, which he described to anyone who would listen as complicated but manageable. Declan worked the property the way he had always worked it, with the same attention to each task that he had given the storage building frame on the morning she arrived. She had stopped finding this remarkable and started finding it simply true, which was how you knew a thing had moved from impressive to real. One evening in late February, she stood with him on the ridge above the main shaft, where the limestone fell away into valley, and the Wyoming sky held more stars than seemed possible. She thought about the woman who had climbed out of a stagecoach 4 months ago with a travel case and a letter of offer, and the specific stubbornness of someone who had already lost the worst thing, and decided it would not happen again. That woman had been right about one thing and wrong about another. She had been right that she could not afford to be stopped. She had been wrong that arriving somewhere safe meant arriving somewhere alone. Declan took her hand, simply without announcement, the way he did everything. She let him simply without qualification. The woman who had come to Ward Creek with nothing but her skill and her refusal had found what she hadn't allowed herself to look for: proof that a person who does the work, tells the truth, and sees it all the way through eventually arrives somewhere that deserves her. And the quiet man who had built his father's mine into something worth protecting had found the one thing no mineral survey could measure and no legal instrument could ever transfer. Someone who had known him when he was just a carpenter with sawdust on his arms, and stayed anyway.